Australian politics, but definitely this is an issue that there's disagreement around it, and we can definitely understand both sides. But in the end of the day, you have to make sure that you don't put your own citizen in harm's way. And the way to do that is not to allow these people to enjoy freedom in Australia. They chose not to live in Australia. They are forced back. They are not. It's not their choice. And this is something that, of course, has an impact politically, but this is not my expertise.
Thank you so much, Yussi, for being with us today. EU Commissioner Deb Ravaka-Soucia will travel to Washington this week to attend the Board of Peace meeting. Set up by US President Donald Trump, Soucia will participate as an observer focusing on Gaza's ceasefire. Trump's envisions for the Board of Peace playing a broader role in resolving global conflicts, which has raised concerns, particularly with the inclusion of Russia and Belarus. Some Western countries, include Poland and Italy, have declined to join, taking a cautious stance. EU spokesperson Guillaume Mercier emphasised that the EU is not becoming a member of the board, but will observe the Gaza portion of its efforts. EU Commissioner Dubravka-Soucia will travel to Washington this week to attend the Board of Peace meeting set up by US President Donald Trump. Soucia will participate as an observer focusing on Gaza's ceasefire. We're now being joined back again by Yossi. Thank you for joining us back here today on NewsX World. With this, do you think the European Commission's decision to participate only as an observer at Trump's Board of Peace meeting rather than a full member signal about EU's diplomatic strategy and its concerns over governance and legal compatibility?
Well, I think the EU has problems with President Trump being the dominant power in the Board of Peace. And they are worried that the Board of Peace is some sort of competition to the United Nations system. And that's why they don't want to see anything that might change the world order as they understand it should be. And they are worried because of that about the role of the Board of Peace. At the same time, they do want to see the plan, Trump's plan, implemented in Gaza. And the tool with which this plan is going to be executed is the Board of Peace. So they want to be involved in they probably want also to contribute and donate money for the purpose of implementing the plan. So this is a way to somehow get involved without totally endorsing the Board of Peace. That's what I think they are trying to do.
Thank you so much, Yossi, for joining us here today on NewsX World. India is hosting the highly anticipated AI Impact Summit at the Bharat Mandapam in New Delhi. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi will inaugurate the summit this evening, kicking off a transformative conversation on artificial intelligence. The summit, which will run until February the 20th, brings together global leaders, innovators and policymakers, including French President Emmanuel Macron, UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres, IMF Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva, and Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva to explore AI's potential in shaping the future. The summit's theme reflects India's commitment to using AI for the greater good, striving for welfare and happiness for all. With over 7,000 square metres of space, the summit provides a platform for collaboration among businesses, startups, state governments and research institutions. Additionally, international delegates will engage in discussions about exploring new opportunities within the global AI ecosystem. We are being joined by our correspondent Thomas Porteous, who is on the ground covering the summit live from Bharat Mandapam in New Delhi. Thomas, what are the key events scheduled for day 2 of this AI summit, and which major speakers or voices are lined up today? What's the situation like on ground?
Well, thank you very much, Ellie. You're joining us from a heaving hall where we're looking at many different exhibits and exhibitions of how artificial intelligence really will play into the future, especially here in India. It's moved from having those discussions to actually making practical movements, and you can see that with some of the exhibits here. Now, as you can see, over 200,000 people are expected here at the summit, many of them flooding the halls around me. We're expected to see many international speakers today, prior to those 2 days at the end of the week, which will see some of the leaders of both geopolitics and the tech world. But of course, we have seen applied artificial intelligence majorly discussed today, whether that's education, whether that's agriculture, but the social good is at the forefront of today's discussion. Inclusive growth and social equality, moving artificial intelligence for something that doesn't just affect the corporate minority, but can indeed benefit India's 1.4 billion people and beyond. A huge focus on governance and artificial intelligence as well today. Of course, AI sparks many concerns, and so there are hopes to iron out some of those concerns, whether that be safety barriers, data protection, among other things. This, of course, is a huge publicly scaled event. As we've said, the world has its eyes on New Delhi currently, with the Prime Minister inaugurating the event yesterday and those key speakers expected later on this week and later today. We've seen the CEOs of Dell, Deloitte and other corporations speak today, but of course the speakers are only going to get better over this week. So yeah, we'll continue to bring you all the updates coming from the ground and beyond as soon as we get them here from the Bharat Mandapam. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas, for giving us that live report update. We are now being joined by Gaurav Vats, who's a cybersecurity expert, who's joining us from New Delhi to also talk more about this AI summit in New Delhi. Thank you for joining us here today on NewsX World. As this is the first major AI summit hosted in the global south, what message does it send to the world, particularly the West, regarding the future of AI development and global collaboration?
Yeah, hi Ali. So first of all, India, when we represent AI on a global scale, right, we are the third most country which is being used. AI is being used, and we are very much competent enough to be at #1 position very soon, just because we have the largest user base of digital users. And India is not only having that user base, but we are also very strong in geopolitical vision in between US and China. So India is having a strong user base and as well as very strong on the geopolitical side. Furthermore, what AI is dependent upon, AI is most dependent upon the data, because in AI, the systems have to learn about how the things and decisions are made, for which it requires data. And India is having the enormous database across the globe. We have the richest UPI, which is already the most famous product globally. And other countries has requested us to give them our complete backbone of UPI. So we are the global leaders in today's world. Yeah.
And given the debates at the summit about a fair compensation for news publishers who content is used to train AI models, what regulatory or business models might emerge that respect intellectual property while still enabling AI innovation?
So we are already having lots of AI startups that are having their intellectual property showcased over there, and these startups are working in majority of the majority of the fields, whether it is digital governance, whether it is smart policing, whether it is defense intelligence, whether it is education, healthcare, and the most impacted area is at the agriculture domain, wherein we are using the capabilities of digital AI-based drones, which are providing the resources to the farmers, with which our farmers have upscaled their not only the business but the country's economy.
And with over 700 sessions planned under thematic working groups addressing AI safety, governance, ethical use and data protection, what concrete deliverables are expected by the end of the summit, and how might they translate into actionable AI policy at national and international levels?
You'd be proud to know that we had already launched a Gazette notification last week before the starting of this summit, and we are already launching a new framework which will give a new kind of dimension to the global AI usage. Very soon you'll see to it. Yeah.
And what can we expect in the coming days in the AI summit? What are we going to expect to come out of these?
The major business owners across the world will come up with this AI as a new direction. Our business leaders, whether it is Ambani's or Adani's or Tata's, we all are, let's say, giving them a strong backhold from the government side so that they can launch up their products, and we are not lagging behind anywhere. And you'll see some good in fact, the latest kind of AI innovations within next 2 to 3 months only, which we are unable to, let's say, disclose it right away.
Thank you so much, Gaurav, for joining us here today on News X World. Thank you.
Thanks.
Meanwhile, at the AI Impact Summit, Kartikeya Sharma, who is a member of Parliament, India, spoke about the impact of AI in healthcare and AI's ground level impact in breast cancer detection at early stages done via NXT Foundation. Let's listen to what Kartikeya Sharma had to say.
Often about disruption, scale, valuation and speed. But here is the real test of innovation. Does it stay inside the conference halls, or does it actually step out and affect people's lives, touch it intrinsically? The NXT conclave was born out of the very question. It was not designed to be another summit of speeches or an applause. It was created as a platform to discuss, track, and implement ideas that create measurable long-term impact. When we conceptualized NXT, the intention was simple: bring policymakers, scientists, entrepreneurs, and industry leaders into one room, not to exchange visiting cards, but to exchange responsibility, not to admire technology, but to deploy it. On the 1st of March 2025 at Bharat Mandapam, right here where we stand, experts demonstrated AI-enabled breast cancer detection technologies. For many in the audience, it was a breakthrough device. For me, it was a moment of clarity, personally. I must share this before I speak any further, because this is something which was very emotionally attached to me. My elder sister, for about 16 years ago, who herself was a doctor, was diagnosed with breast cancer in the 3rd stage. And this is while she was working at Johns Hopkins. And in spite of the fact that she was a doctor, she had problems in knowing that she was plagued with this problem, with this disease. So in this technology exists, why should it remain confined to hospitals in metropolitan cities? Why should awareness, access, and affordability decide survival? Because in India, the breast cancer is not only a medical challenge, it's also social silence. According to the Indian Council of Medical Research, breast cancer accounts for nearly 28% of all cancers in women in India today. And the Globocan estimates more than 2.3 lakh new cases annually, which also results into about 90,000 deaths every year.
French authorities have opened a murder investigation into the death of far-right activist Quentin Durancy, who was attacked last week by at least 6 people during a protest in Lyon. The 23-year-old succumbed to severe brain injuries, and the case is being treated as both intentional homicide and aggravated assault. The attack, reportedly linked to a clash between left and right-wing extremists, has raised tensions ahead of the upcoming municipal elections and the 2027 presidential race. President Emmanuel Macron has called for calm and for swift justice, while political tensions escalate, with both far-left and far-right groups blaming each other for the violence. Nigerian defense spokesperson says that about 100 US military personnel have arrived in Nigeria as part of an operation to target Islamist insurgents. This comes after US President Donald Trump criticized Nigeria for failing to protect Christians from Islamist militants in the northwest. However, Nigeria denies religious discrimination, stating its security forces target armed groups attacking both Christians and Muslims. US military involvement has been increasing, with airstrikes against ISIS-linked militants in December and a small US team enhancing Nigeria's intelligence capabilities. Major General Somalia Uba confirmed that the US troops will train and advise local forces, not engage in combat. Nigeria's government has called for more support, including fighter jets and munitions. That's all we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.
In the midst of death, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
what we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with US a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination, and if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
Hello and welcome, I'm Ellie Richardson and you're watching The World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top headlines of this hour. US President Donald Trump hopes Ukraine reaches a deal with Russia fast ahead of Washington-brokered talks in Geneva today. Trump is pushing to end the conflict, but two previous rounds of US-mediated talks in Abu Dhabi did not yield any signs of a breakthrough. Donald Trump said that he would be involved indirectly in high-stakes talks between Iran and the US over Tehran's nuclear program in Geneva, adding he believed Tehran wanted to make a deal. President Trump has said Cuba was a failed nation and called on Havana to make a deal. Washington is in talks with Cuba's highest people just days after he threatened the island's struggling economy with what he described as a virtual oil blockade. New Mexico lawmakers passed legislation to launch what they said was the first full investigation into what happened on Zorro Ranch, where the late US sex offender Jeffrey Epstein is accused of trafficking and sexually assaulting girls and women. A bipartisan committee will seek testimony from survivors of alleged sexual abuse at the ranch, located about 30 miles south of Santa Fe. French President Emmanuel Macron begins a three-day visit to India with talks focused on artificial intelligence cooperation and a potential multi-billion-dollar Dassault Rafale fighter jet deal. 3 people, including the suspect, were fatally shot during a Rhode Island youth hockey game. Pawtucket Police Chief Tina Conclays told reporters that 3 other victims were hospitalised in critical condition. The shooter died from an apparent self-inflicted gun wound. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese said on Tuesday his government would not help Australians in a Syrian camp holding families of suspected Islamic State militants return home, with the government open to prosecutions if they make it back. Ireland's Data Protection Commission, DPC, said it has opened a formal investigation into X's AI chatbot Grok over the processing of personal data and its potential to produce harmful sexualized images and videos, including of children. India is hosting the highly anticipated AI Impact Summit at the Bharat Mandapam in New Delhi. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi will inaugurate the summit this evening, kicking off a transformative conversation on artificial intelligence. The summit, which will run until February the 20th, brings together global leaders, innovators and policymakers, including French President Emmanuel Macron, UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres, IMF Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva and Brazilian President Luiz Inaciano Lula da Silva to explore AI's potential in shaping the future. The summit's theme reflects India's commitment to using AI for the greater good, striving for welfare and happiness for all. Attendees will experience live demonstrations and exhibits from 300 pavilions, featuring contributions from 13 countries, including the United Kingdom, Japan, Russia and Australia. With over 7,000 square metres of space, the summit provides a platform for collaborations among businesses, startups, state governments and research institutions. Additionally, international delegates will engage in discussions about exploring new opportunities within the global AI ecosystem. Meanwhile, Estonia President Alar Karis has arrived in Delhi to participate in the India AI Impact Summit. Indian Union Minister of State for Youth Affairs and Sports Raksha Kadis welcomed him at the airport. His visit is aimed at strengthening bilateral ties, specifically in digital governance, AI innovation, cybersecurity and innovation. As part of the AI Impact Summit 2026, a series of high-level bilateral meetings are scheduled. Today, dignitaries will meet starting with Spain's President Pedro Sanchez, followed by Finland's Prime Minister Antti Petri Orpo and Serbia's President Alexander Vučić. At meetings continue throughout the day, with Croatia's Prime Minister Andrej Plenković, Estonia's President Alar Karis, Bhutan's Prime Minister Dasho Trising and Kazakhstan's Prime Minister Olzaz Pektov. And on Thursday the 19th February, discussions with key leaders are to be continued, including Abu Dhabi's Crown Prince Sheikh Khalid bin Mohammed bin Zayed, the Netherlands Prime Minister Dick Schoof, Switzerland's President Guy Parmelin and Greece's Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis. The meetings wrap up on Friday, 20th February, with leaders from Liechtenstein, Slovakia, Sri Lanka, the United Nations and Mauritius. And for your top stories this hour, India has seized 3 oil tankers linked to Iran and sanctioned by the US. The vessels, Stilab Ruby, Asphalt Star and Al Jafia, were intercepted off Mumbai's coast after suspicious activities were detected. These tankers were reportedly changing identities to evade law enforcement. India is increasing maritime surveillance to prevent illicit ship-to-ship oil transfers, often used to bypass sanctions. While Iranian officials deny any connection to the tankers, US records show that they are linked to Iranian oil. The seizures come amid improving US-India ties, with Washington recently reducing tariffs on Indian goods. India now has around 55 ships and 10 to 12 aircraft monitoring its waters. We are now being joined by Major General Sudhakar Ji, who's a senior geopolitical and strategic defence expert, joining us from Jaipur. Thank you for joining us here today on News X World. What methods, like changing ship identities to ship transfers, are suspected to be used to evade sanctions, and why are those practices a concern for maritime security?
Morning, Ellie. Thank you for inviting me for your show. First and foremost thing is that whenever any ship is sanctioned unilaterally by any country in the world, it does not get testified or doesn't stand the scrutiny of law of the International Court of Justice and the affiliated organization. But be that as it may, we all know that might is right, and we keep learning from the old usages of the Greek philosopher Thucydides trap. What he said is that the strong will do what it can, the weak will suffer what it must. What it means is that the superpower is superpower. If they have imposed sanction, well, then it demands the neighboring countries or at least close allies to support for achievement of the mission-oriented objective. But be that as it may, India and USA have not had very good relations in past couple of months, but there has been turn of event. The trade deal has come through, although there are a lot of caveats and gaps to be plugged. There are clear indications of normalization as of now. How far it will go, time will tell. But the fact of the matter remains that Iran, being where it is geographically, it is part of Asia, and anything that happens in Iran will have direct and indirect impact on India, because the sea lanes of communication passes from Persian Gulf through Strait of Hormuz, then the Sea of Oman, through the Arabian Sea, Indian Ocean region, and through Malacca Strait to South China Sea. Now India's export is around 95% that passes through maritime routes. 55% through South China Sea, around 45% through this route. But most importantly, we have had very ugly experience of 26/11, attack on Taj Hotel in Mumbai, and to eradicate such kind of turn of events against the national security, India has to take proactive action, and hence the response matrix entails effective surveillance, monitoring, and also seizing such kind of activities by the vessels of unknown identity, which have reportedly been sanctioned by the United States. It is simply to actually give effective countermeasures against any untoward eventuality or activity that may unfold along its coastline and in the mainland. Back to you, Lee.
And Iran has denied links to the seized tankers. How might such denials affect diplomatic tensions between India, Iran and the US?
Very brilliant question. I must compliment you. It's the geopolitics is in a churn. It does. No matter what people say, it does. Because at one point in time in 2007, our dependence on Iran for import of oil was close to a little more than 17% of the total import by India. I'm talking about the fossil fuel. Because of pressure by the United States, we had no option, India had no option, but to bring it down to zero by 2017. So this is the first and foremost thing, that our energy security takes a beating, although we have been restructuring our architecture, diversifying so as to import more oil from other countries, including United States and Venezuela. That we'll see how it happens. But the point which you are asking, it definitely does not augur well for healthy and constructive relationship between India and Iran. It definitely puts India in a back foot as far as our alliances and our cooperation is concerned, because the Chabahar port, on which India has spent billions of dollars, has already been sanctioned by USA. We can no longer operate it, and I only hope and pray that the United States understands the meaning and the objectivity of Chabahar port. It was meant to counter effectively the Gwadar port, which has been leased to China by Pakistan. That is one part. Now coming to the second issue which you raised, it's a very important issue, relationship between India and the US. Whether we like it or not, India is looking at a long-term objective of 30 trillion US dollar or more GDP by 2047 or earlier than that. If that has to be achieved as a long-term objective, then India is left with no option but to have access into the market of United States. It is as much required as USA requires the 570 million middle class population or people with the buying capacity of more than $12 a day. So therefore it brings us to a state wherein we are expected, India is expected to navigate this complexity with a little softer approach, not with the hardened strategic autonomy which is being articulated from time to time. We need to calibrate, soften our approach at times, and at times we need to harden it so as to protect our national interest. Back to you, Ali.
Thank you, Major General Stakji, but don't go too far as we will be back with you very shortly. New Mexico lawmakers have passed legislation to launch a comprehensive investigation into Jeffrey Epstein's Zuro Ranch, where he's accused of trafficking and sexually assaulting girls and women. The bipartisan committee, known as the Truth Commission, aims to identify individuals who may have known about or participated in the abuse. The $2.5 million investigation, which has subpoena power, is set to begin on Tuesday, with interim findings expected in July. This investigation follows Epstein's death in 2019 and comes after the release of new files shedding light on his ties to influential figures, including former New Mexico's governors. Let's listen in to what New Mexico State Representative and Commission legislation co-sponsor Andrea Romero had to say.
And so to think that this was happening for decades, that this predator was preying upon women, people in our community, is not only terrifying, it's just abhorrent that we couldn't turn every stone over at the time that he could be held accountable. And so for any sense of justice to be had, we have to tell the truth. We have to tell the story of what happened here.
We are now being joined again back by Major General Stakji. Thank you for joining us back here today. What gaps or failures in earlier investigations, federal or state, does this new Truth Commission seek to address?
You mean to say about the Epstein file or something else you have in mind?
About the going into the Zuro Ranch, linking to the Epstein files.
Okay. The gaps, we need to understand the federal structure of United States of America, and Epstein being what it has turned out to be the epicenter of immoral, unethical activity, and it is creating very unexpected ripples all over the world. It's gone beyond the boundary of USA. Now, within USA, it needs to be understood that there is a distinction between the state. The provinces have a certain power, and the center has got certain power. And when you talk about the distinction between the two, there are certain issues which have to be followed up and strictly enforced by the state administration. But there are certain issues where the center has to actually seize the opportunity and go in for executive orders to impose some countermeasures. Otherwise, the national security matters related to defense, finance, and foreign policy will be impacted. So under these thumb rule guidelines, whichever and whenever any issue that actually impinges on these three dimensions. Now the technology is taking a kind of overriding importance. The critical minerals are also taking, so as the scientific innovations, and likewise, every time when it is passing by to a future roadmap, there will be new issues which will come up. As long as the overall national security is protected and addressed in an effective manner, I think my take is that it should be a rightful solution to any kind of challenge. And that includes the Epstein file issue as well.
Mm. And what kind of evidence and testimonies will the Commission be looking for exactly? And how might survivor accounts shape the findings?
Well, So far, there are millions of photos and emails and files which have already been released. And I'm given to understand through informal sources that there are many more which are yet to be released by the Department of Justice. When I say this, I'm mindful of the fact that many high officials and also high dignitaries, not only in USA, also outside USA, have been indicated to be involved in some form or the other. Now, when you talk about the evidence, the legal scrutiny will always demand substantive kind of evidence to prove the culpability or the involvement of an individual, because here the character of an individual is under stake. And it is something like character assassination. It amounts to defamation of an individual. So when you start actually dealing with such kind of subjects, the justice not only has to be meted out, but it has to be meted out in a very objective manner. For that, one requires very, very tangible, substantive and objective evidence highlighting the involvement of the accused. Otherwise, in the court of law, it may fall flat and they may take recourse to defamation of their personality and the character. Back to you, Ellie.
Thank you so much, Major General Stakkerji, for joining us here today on NewsX World. It's a pleasure speaking with you. President Donald Trump has recently confirmed that the United States and Cuba are currently in talks amid Cuba's severe fuel shortage caused by a White House-imposed oil blockade. Trump stated that Cuba is facing dire conditions and is struggling to maintain essential services like air travel and medical care. The US has restricted trade with Cuba due to its ties with Iran, Russia and China. According to reports, Cuba is facing immense challenges, with multiple flight suspensions and international aid being sent to support the island's needs.
Cuba is right now a failed nation. They don't even have jet fuel to get for airplanes to take off. They're clogging up their runway. We're talking to Cuba right now. They have Marco Rubio talking to Cuba right now. That they should absolutely make a deal because it's really a humanitarian threat. We'll see how it all turns out, but Cuba and us, we are talking. In the meantime, there's an embargo, there's no oil, there's no money, there's no anything.
If a deal is made, would you consider an operation like the one in Venezuela?
I don't want to answer that. Why would I answer that? If I was, it wouldn't be a very tough operation, as you could figure. But I don't think that'll be necessary.
We are now being joined by Ambassador Vishwanathan, who is a Latin American expert and former ambassador to Venezuela, joining us from New Delhi. Thank you for joining us here today on NewsX World. What might be the broader diplomatic consequences for the US relations in Latin America if Washington continues its pressure campaign against Havana and causing them so many disruptions, and now they're relying on humanitarian aid from other countries?
Well, Trump is talking nonsense when he says Cuba is a failed state. The culprit for this is he himself and the United States. They have been imposing these illegal sanctions for the last 70 years on Cuba. Every year, United Nations passes a resolution asking United States to remove these illegal sanctions. Imagine, suppose the Chinese impose sanctions on United States. The Americans will not be able to celebrate Christmas or have fireworks on 4th of July because 90% of the Christmas decorations and fireworks come from China. Now, Cuba in this kind of catastrophe because of these illegal American sanctions. If they stop that, then Cuba will become a normal country. They can do business with other countries.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Vishwanathan, for joining us here today on News X World. Social media platform X was briefly down for several users globally, with thousands of users reporting disruptions in loading app and accessing feed. Several users reported technical errors in loading feed, failed search results and accessing the social media app. The internet users reported error messages while accessing. According to reports, the services resumed in the social media site an hour after the outage. There wasn't an immediate confirmation from X on the outage, nor was there any update on the reason behind it. That's all we have time for this hour. Keep watching News X World for more news updates from around the world.
In the midst of death, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with the US a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination, and if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
in the midst of this, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with the US a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination, and if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
Hello and welcome, I'm Ellie Richardson and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top headlines of this hour. Russian officials have arrived in Geneva for talks with US and Ukrainian teams aimed at ending the years-long conflict in Ukraine. US President Donald Trump hopes Ukraine reaches a deal with Russia fast. US President Donald Trump said that he would be involved indirectly in high-stakes talks between Iran and the US over Tehran's nuclear program in Geneva, adding he believed Tehran wanted to make a deal. Bangladesh's Prime Minister-to-be Tariq Rahman and lawmakers are sworn into Parliament, becoming the first elected representative since a deadly 2024 uprising. President Donald Trump has said Cuba was a failed nation and called on Havana to make a deal. Washington is in talks with Cuba's highest people just days after he threatened the island's struggling economy with what he described as a virtual oil blockade. New Mexico lawmakers passed legislation to launch what they said was the first full investigation into what's happened at Zorro Ranch, where the late US sex offender Jeffrey Epstein is accused of trafficking and sexually assaulting girls and women. A bipartisan committee will seek testimony from survivors of alleged sexual abuse at the ranch, located about 30 miles south of Santa Fe. Heavy rains and strong winds have lashed New Zealand in recent days, killing one man, flooding large areas and cutting power links to tens of thousands across New Zealand's North Island. French President Emmanuel Macron begins a 3-day visit to India, with talks focused on artificial intelligence cooperation and a potential multi-billion-dollar Dassault Rafale fighter jet deal. 3 people, including the suspect, were fatally shot during a Rhode Island youth hockey game. Pawtucket Police Chief Tina Goncalves told reporters that 3 other victims were hospitalized in critical condition. The shooter died from an apparent self-inflicted gun wound. A terror attack in Pakistan's Baghur region has resulted in the deaths of 11 security forces personnel and 1 child, the military has confirmed. 7 others, including women and children, were also injured in the attack. The AS Alliance targeted security personnel in the northwestern region, which has seen rising militancy in recent years. The military has launched an investigation into the attack, but no group has claimed responsibility yet. This tragic incident underscores the ongoing security challenges faced by Pakistan, especially in its tribal areas. The authorities have heightened security in the region as they continue their search for those responsible. And now for your top stories this hour. The US and Iran are set to hold indirect nuclear talks in Geneva, with both sides hoping to resolve their long-standing nuclear dispute. US envoys Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner have reached Geneva and are going to participate in high-level talks mediated by Oman, alongside Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi. President Donald Trump indicated that he would be involved indirectly, expressing confidence Tehran wanted a deal to avoid the consequences of military action. Meanwhile, US military forces are preparing for a possible operations, and Iran has begun a military drill in the Strait of Hormuz, a key oil shipping route. Iran's weakened state due to the protests and airstrikes has further complicated these talks, with both nations at odds over the nuclear and missile issues. The US and Iran are set to hold indirect nuclear talks in Geneva, with both sides hoping to resolve their long-standing nuclear dispute. US envoys Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner have reached Geneva and are going to participate in high-level talks mediated by Oman. Alongside Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, President Donald Trump indicated that he would be involved indirectly, expressing confidence Tehran wanted to deal and avoid the consequences of military action. Meanwhile, US military forces are preparing for possible operations, and Iran has begun a military drill into the Strait of Hormuz, a key oil shipping route. Iran's weakened state due to protests and airstrikes has further complicated the talks, with both nations at odds over the nuclear and missile issues. This is ridiculous. As we know from the past 2 talks with US and Iran, they have not been as hopeful as what they both wanted, with US wanting another thing and Iran wanting something different. The US has now released. We are now being joined by Ambassador Mahesh Sachdev, who's a former diplomat, who is joining us from New Delhi. Thank you so much for joining us here today on NewsX World. Given that Iran has been enriching uranium close to weapons grade levels and has limited IAEA access, what role should the International Atomic Energy Agency play in ensuring transparency and building trust within these talks?
It's a good question. I think the terms of IAEA supervision and inspections, the entire regime has been laid out in the JCPOA signed in 2014 between Iran and seven countries. And I think these these inspection regimes need to be reintroduced with suitable modifications. And I think another issue that has come up since is the whereabouts of the enriched uranium, some 400 kilograms of which seem to be missing after the US attack in June 2025.
And as regional military tensions increase, including Iranian naval drills in the Strait of Hormuz and US military buildup, how do these security postures outside the negotiating room impact the potential for diplomatic breakthroughs?
It's a good question. I think they complicate as well as complement the negotiations in Geneva. They complicate because rhetoric is not conducive to peace negotiations and give and take. Both sides have issued hardline statements. Mr. Trump has been saying all sort of verbosities and invectives and threatening Iran with dire consequences. On the other hand, Iranians have been saying that if they are attacked, they will attack the United States installations all over the Gulf, and this may introduce a regional war. Strait of Hormuz and Bab el-Mandeb being closed have been threatened. So all that put together is not very conducive. At the same time, these threats and these posturings make it important for both sides and the world at large to come to some kind of peaceful settlement, because a war is unlikely to be short and swift and decisive. And it may have consequences, economic, social, and others for the region as well as beyond. So these kind of background situation may make it imperative for the two sides to come to some more flexible arrangement.
And how credible and effective are indirect negotiations where leaders are not directly at the table at resolving complex issues like nuclear proliferation, and what alternative diplomatic mechanisms might be necessary if these talks falter?
That's more of a systemic issue. If they want to negotiate an end to the crisis, direct or indirect talks are not material. Either way, the concessions can be reached and mutual accommodation can be fostered. Subsequently, in a more peaceful atmosphere, perhaps negotiations can be held bilaterally and the leaders could meet. But for the moment, I think indirect talks mediated by Oman are the best possible scenario.
Thank you for being here, Sachdev, for joining us, and we should be with you very shortly. Thank you. Ukraine has accused Russia of undermining peace efforts ahead of critical talks in Geneva, with Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiga saying Russia launched dozens of missiles and hundreds of drones in a massive strike before the negotiations. Despite these attacks, the peace talks mediated by the US are set to resume in Geneva today, following two earlier rounds in Abu Dhabi. The Kremlin has stated that it aims to discuss territorial disputes, while Ukraine remains firm on not conceding control over the Donetsk region. Both sides are expected to discuss a possible ceasefire on attacks targeting Ukraine's energy facilities, though a resolution to the war remains elusive. We are now being joined back again by Ambassador Mahesh Sachdev. Thank you for joining us back here. With reports that Russia carried out attacks immediately before Geneva talks, how does such continued military action affect trust and momentum in negotiations, and what does it signal about Moscow's willingness to compromise?
I think this has become a regular pattern. Whenever the talks are being held, the two sides intensify the fighting on the ground, perhaps hoping to influence decisions for at the negotiating table by appearing to be strong on the ground. And these tactics go tandem with the negotiations, and to my mind, they have no real consequence for the talks. Talks are on their own fulcrum, while fighting goes on regardless. Now, having said that, the context provided by intensified fighting and sufferance of mostly Ukrainian population frames this this round of talk in Geneva when the cold season is still in a fairly severe situation. The Russian deliberate attacks on energy installations makes electricity and hot water, etc., difficult to provide, and the population has to suffer the consequences. This is also supposedly mean to show the vulnerability of the population and erode the morale of the public, and it's backing for continuation of the war. But then these have not had any such consequences. If anything, they have hardened the morale of civilian population who have long had stiff upper lip over various travails in the war, which completes 4 years later this month. Thank you.
And territorial disputes, particularly over the Donbas region and control of infrastructure like nuclear plants, remain core sticking points. How realistic is a breakthrough if these foundational issues aren't addressed explicitly in Geneva?
I think creative solutions need to be found for these and other sticking points. For example, while Russia wants entire Donbas region to be its territory, it has already declared them to be part of Russia. Ukraine doesn't want to cede any territory at all. So perhaps a demilitarized zone in that area from where Ukraine could withdraw its forces without conceding the control. And sort of neutral force could be appointed there. Similarly, joint custody or IAEA run custody of the nuclear power plant, Europe's biggest, could also be handled if the two sides are willing to accommodate each other to some extent.
Thank you so much, Mahesh Sachdev, for joining us here today on NewsX World. Thank you.
Thank you.
Poland temporarily closed airports in Rzeszów and Lublin on Tuesday due to military aviation operations. The Polish Air Navigation Services Agency reported the closure was triggered by strikes from Russia's long-range air forces targeting Ukrainian territory. Polish military commanders said the operations were necessary to secure the country's airspace amid rising tensions. Panta confirmed that the airports have since resumed normal operations. This disruption highlights the ongoing security concerns in the region as military activities continue along the Ukrainian border. Nigerian defense spokesperson says that about 100 US military personnel have arrived in Nigeria as part of an operation to target Islamist insurgents. This comes after US President Donald Trump criticized Nigeria for failing to protect Christians from Islamist militants in the northwest. However, Nigeria denies religious discrimination, stating its security forces target armed groups attacking both Christians and Muslims. US military involvement has been increasing with airstrikes against ISIS-linked militants in December and a small US team enhancing Nigeria's intelligence capabilities. Major General Somalia Uba confirmed that the US troops will train and advise local forces not engage in combat. Nigeria's government has called for more support, including fighter jets and munitions. We are now being joined by Major General Dr. Rajan Kochhar, who's an international relations expert, joining us from New Delhi. Thank you for joining us here today on NewsX World. What strategic goals are both the United States and Nigeria pursuing with the expanded US military deployment, and how does this align with Nigeria's own security needs against groups like the Islamic State West Africa province?
Thank you, Ali, because the problem in Nigeria is quite profound, and we heard the statement of President Trump also some time back when he said that Christians are being targeted, because basically in Nigeria, as far as the ethnicity is concerned, there are two major groups. One are the Muslims and other Christians, in possibly a ratio of 52 to 48%. And mostly these Muslims are concentrated in the northern and the northwest area, and the Christians are a southern area. And the central part of Nigeria is a mix of Christians and Muslims, and the problem is primarily in this part of the area, where both the communities are staying with each other. Though Nigeria is insisting that they don't have any specific ethnicity problem against the Christians, but we have seen terrorist groups like Boko Haram, and as you actually mentioned, the Islamic State West Africa province. So basically the role of these 100 US personnel is basically in the form of an advisory and a technical specialist in order to train the Nigerian army on various aspects of warfare, something like sharing of intelligence, technical assistance, assistance in the terms of communication, in terms of surveillance, in terms of reconnaissance, and as well as training and firing of the weapon systems. So I think they are not going to be involved in a direct combat situation. They are more into the assistance and the advisory mode, and they have come on the request of the Nigerian government. So it is very, very clear that the US has not forcefully entered. These people have not forcefully entered, but from Abuja's request, they have actually come there. The strategic implication of this is that the US is trying to send a message that it's a strong strategic partner of Nigeria, and it is willing to help Nigeria in their military training as well as training their armed forces. So we are seeing a situation where the Nigerian government wants to stabilize the influence of these Islamic terrorist groups who are trying to create terror, and the point is, it is not only related to the Christians. There are a number of kidnappings also taking place in Nigeria due to the ransom, and then we have this political control of the local governments also in Nigeria. If you look at the local government structure, everybody wants to control that part of the local governance. So these terrorist groups are also with an aim to control the local government. And the third important aspect is land ownership, because a huge amount of land they want to control, and they are conflicting actually groups who are preventing them for ownership of these lands. So possibly the security forces want to strengthen themselves in a manner so that they can tackle these groups like the Islamic group or Boko Haram, and try to bring stability to the administration in Nigeria.
Thank you so much, Major General Dr. Rajan Kuchar, for joining us here today on NewsX World. Imran Khan's sons have applied for visas to visit him in Pakistan, while his physician remains unable to verify reports of improvement in the former PM's eyesight. Khan's personal doctor, Dr. Asim Yusuf, was briefed by prison doctors about an improvement in Khan's eye condition following treatment. However, Dr. Yusuf stated he cannot confirm this as he is not being allowed to access Khan. A panel of eye specialists had previously examined him in Adila jail on the Supreme Court's orders after complaints of partial vision loss. In Azerbaijan, the final court verdict has been delivered in the criminal case against Armenian citizen Ruben Vardanian, charged with crimes against peace and humanity, war crimes, terrorism, and other serious offences under the Criminal Code of Azerbaijan. The Baku military court, chaired by Judge Zainal Agajev, sentenced Vardanian to 20 years in prison. During the trial, the state prosecutor had requested a life sentence. The proceedings were attended by Vardanian, his defense team, victims, legal representative, and Azerbaijani state officials, including Rafat Mammadov, head of the Cabinet of Ministers office, who participated as a victim. Former US President Barack Obama has clarified his recent comments in an interview about extradition's trial life after saying they're real. During an interview, Obama initially said they're real, but I haven't seen them. He added that there are no underground facilities like Area 51 hiding aliens unless there's a massive conspiracy. Obama later explained his comments were made in the spirit of a speed round and emphasized that while the universe is vast, the chances of Earth being visited by aliens are low. He also stated there was no evidence of extradition's trial contract during his presidency. The Spanish government has ordered prosecutors to investigate social media platforms X, Meta and TikTok for allegedly spreading AI-generated child sexual abuse material. Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez condemned these platforms for having children's mental health, dignity and rights, calling for an end to an impunity of tech giants. Earlier this month, Sanchez announced measures to curb online abuse, including a proposed ban on social media access for children under 16. These steps come as a part of a broader effort to protect children from online harm. That's all we have time for this hour. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.
In the midst of death, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
Hello and welcome. You're watching Trending Tech on NewsX World, where we bring you the latest tech breakthroughs and trends from around the world. Europe is heavily reliant on imports for core digital technologies, with around 80% coming from outside its borders. This includes crucial components like semiconductors and cloud infrastructure. As geopolitical tensions grow, especially with the war in Ukraine and the US-China tech rivalry, the EU is focusing on technological sovereignty, but the question remains, are European leaders aiming for true independence or just reducing their exposure to geopolitical risks? The EU has launched several initiatives to address these gaps, such as investing billions in semiconductor production and sovereign cloud infrastructure. However, the real challenge lies in whether Europe can realistically build competitive alternatives to US tech giants, or if managed, interdependence is the more practical route. As Europe strengthens its partnerships with India and other democracies, it's clear that the tech landscape is evolving, but can Europe truly achieve digital sovereignty by 2030, or will it still rely on larger global powers? Now we welcome to discuss all this and more. Joining us now is Mr. Martin Hulin. He's a director of the Bertelsmann Stiftung's Digitalization and the Common Good program since October 2023. Mr. Martin leads a team focused on developing innovative approaches to strengthen the common good at both the national and international levels. His areas of expertise include international digital and data policy, AI, and sustainability policy. His work and views have been presented at prestigious venues like the UN World Data Forum and COP conferences, and he was honored with the Future of Data Award in 2023. Thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Martin Hulin.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. Now diving into my first question, Europe currently imports around 80% of its core digital technologies, from advanced semiconductors to cloud infrastructure, and estimates it may need up to 3.6 trillion euros by 2030 to close critical capability gaps. Recent geopolitical shocks, from the war in Ukraine to US-China tech rivalry, have intensified concerns about strategic dependence. When European leaders talk about technological sovereignty, are they aiming for true independence or simply reducing exposure to geopolitical risks?
Thank you for this question. So the reality is 80% of dependency on technological tools is indeed a vulnerability, and especially in those areas that you have pointed out, like semiconductors, cloud infrastructure, and AI, where disruptions of, for example, imports could paralyze our economies and also governments. And Europe at this stage is in the middle of a mapping exercise of seeing where these vulnerabilities are, and is fully aware that, of course, there's already an existing huge interdependence. However, the current focus is very much on reducing critical dependencies that pose also geopolitical and security risks for us. And the goal from a geopolitical risk point of view is, of course, that we can act autonomously in crises, even if we remain interconnected with global supply chains. And examples like the recent Greenland crisis, where there was a threat to cut off potentially also digital infrastructure, and of course the ongoing reality of China's control over rare earths, highlight the urgency of such securing of strategic capabilities. And the approach that we are currently following in Europe is very much one of pragmatic sovereignty. We aim to build enough domestic and also capacity of strategic partners to avoid the risk of coercion, to ensure continuity in critical sectors, but this also means that we are now heavily investing in modular and interoperable technologies, such as, for example, the Eurostat proposals that have been around in Europe since last year, rather than replicating an entire ecosystem approach like the one we have been socialized with from Silicon Valley.
Very interesting. Thank you very much, Mr. Martin, for sharing that. And now, under the EU CHIPS Act, billions are being invested to raise Europe's share of global semiconductor or production, like you mentioned, including IMEC's 2.5 billion euros next generation chip pilot line in Belgium. Yet advanced chip fabrication remains dominated by East Asia and the United States. Is Europe trying to become a major chip power again, or is the real objective to secure enough domestic capacity to avoid supply shocks in a crisis?
At this stage, it's really rather the latter. I mean, Europe at this stage might be leading on certain semiconductors in niche areas, but it's not a major global chip power. So this is about also crisis-proofing our capacity. And according to the CHIPS Act, our objective is to secure 10 to 20% of global advanced chip production, enough to avoid these shortages in critical sectors like automotive, healthcare, and defense, where we recently had experiences where certain shortages in chip supply, for example, led to the stop of production in the automotive industry. And investments like the ones you've mentioned in Belgium are about ensuring that Europe has control over key parts of the supply chain, while not, of course, dominating the market. And as I said before, this is really about specialization over scale, because we will never match the Taiwan approach to cutting-edge fabrication, but we can really focus on those niche areas where we have strength, such as in specialized automotive chips, also future technologies like quantum computing and potential advanced packaging and machinery-related semiconductors. And the goal is, again, avoid being held hostage by geopolitical tensions or supply chain disruptions. And this also then underlines this importance for strategic partnerships, because we are very much working on now strategic partnerships with allies like India as well, to diversify supply chains and ensure that we have alternative sources for critical components.
Thank you for highlighting that. And now, Europe's investment in sovereign cloud infrastructure is projected to more than triple by 2027. Even though US providers still control most of the market, governments worry about data security, foreign legal exposure, and strategic vulnerability. So as you mentioned, goal is not to avoid being hostage. Can Europe realistically build competitive alternatives to American hyperscalers, or is managed interdependence in the more practical model?
Yes, so particularly when we are referring to the cloud part of the technological stack, this is very much currently a development that we are observing in Europe, that there is a push for true sovereign alternatives. We have, of course, seen in the past that on topics like data security legal compliance, it was very difficult to have solutions provided by US hyperscalers that fully are aligned with these types of core values. We've also been seeing a big push from US-based companies on providing sovereignty as a service, while at the same time, when one looks behind the screen of these types of suggestions, nevertheless, we are still then affected by not fully sufficient guarantees around data flows that might then actually flow away from our own home turf. So there were projects in the past like Gaia-X, but also homegrown alternatives that aim to provide European-controlled alternatives. But this is, of course, a complex effort right now to try to also manage the interdependence that we have in our industries, all the way into our governments on existing, let's say, for example, US cloud services. So Europe will most likely continue in using some of these services where it's practical, but with much stricter conditions around data localization and transparency. And the focus right now is, of course, on securing critical infrastructure like government, healthcare, defense data, where we very much will make sure that we have access to then true, really also self-sufficient solutions that are there. And we will most likely use regulation as a lever because we have existing very strong regulatory frameworks like the GDPR, we have the Digital Markets Act that are also used to create a level playing field. And also something that was not used in the past enough is the approach of using public procurement, then also for solutions made in Europe or with Europe. That's currently a big debate. So certainly we'll see lots of movement in that particular sector.
And as you highlight, there are differences in alignment of values between US and Europe. European Union has led globally on digital regulation, from data protection to AI governance, arguing that rules reflect democratic values. At the same time, critics warn that heavy regulations may deter investment and slow innovation. Can regulation itself be a source of geopolitical power, or does tech sovereignty ultimately require globally dominant firms, not just strong rule-making?
As per usual, I think the truth is somewhere in between. Firstly, on this Brussels effect, or this regulation as geopolitical power, Europe's recent regulatory strength has shown and set also global standards around the AI Act, for example. So it forced even US and Chinese companies to adapt because there was a form also of soft power through rulemaking. And we are still convinced that strong regulation can shape global norms and create also a competitive advantage, while at the same time also realizing that rules aren't enough because Europe needs to build. Europe needs European champions in different sectors of the technological stack to also turn this regulatory leadership into market influence. And the challenge is always to balance regulation with innovation and not to fall into this trap of saying only if we fully deregulate, we only can be truly innovative, because we have examples like in our mobile sector that was extremely innovative, that only started to flourish based on very clear, set, transparent rules in order to also allow then our homegrown companies then to flourish. So long story short, a hybrid approach currently is being investigated, where Europe, of course, must enforce its regulation to prevent monopolization, while also investing heavily in scaling of European alternatives with also strategic like-minded partners all around the globe, because the approach we are taking is not an exercise in isolationism, but one where we believe that there is a place for technology that serves society and not the other way around.
Thank you for highlighting that. And now in January 2026, the long-negotiated India-EU Free Trade Agreement was concluded, covering nearly 97% of trade value, alongside cooperation on semiconductors, digital standards, and 6G research. India is positioning itself as a trusted alternative manufacturing and technology partner as Western economies diversify away from China. Is India emerging as a central pillar in Europe's tech resilience strategy, or is the transatlantic relationship still the core anchor of the European digital security?
India is certainly a complementary pillar in our strategy also to de-risk across our technological chain. And the India agreement signals deeper cooperation in, as you rightly pointed out, semiconductors, digital standards, and 6G research, making India one of the key partners in diversifying also our supply chains. And India offers, of course, an interesting alternative also when it comes to manufacturing and research and development. But the transatlantic relationships, having also been built up over decades, still remain another core pillar because we are very much still fully intertwined when it comes to this. But India can provide a critical opportunity for diversification. Our strategy in Europe is also to build multiple partnerships to reduce dependency on any single partner country. And certain limitations around the India partnerships could also still be linked to, for example, export controls, where there are certain restrictions when it comes to chip technology, but also political differences may still limit collaboration in sensitive areas like defense tech. But the focus for now, based on our observations, is on commercial and civilian tech cooperation with potential growth areas like around AI ethics and green technology. And of course, Europe was also very attentive when it came to the Indian approach to building digital public infrastructure, which is very interesting, while at the same time, we are also aware that it will not be a silver bullet or a copy of paste model, but rather would be very interested in investigating the lessons learned, but also maybe the lessons that are not worth replicating when we approach our own digital infrastructure built out here in Europe.
And as you rightfully highlighted in our earlier question, that every crisis exposes the limits and ability of Europe. Europe remains economically intertwined with China, even as concerns grow over economic coercion, supply chain, and concentration in critical technologies. India, by contrast, has taken a more security-driven approach to Chinese tech firms. Does Europe need to recalibrate its economic relationship with China to achieve genuine tech sovereignty and cloud? Could deeper AI cooperation with India form part of that diversification strategy?
Certainly. I think what we are observing here is a recalibration of the relationship, but not per se yet a huge decoupling, because of course there are indeed existing reliances on China in certain critical areas around rare earth supply chains, 5G, but also semiconductors. But at the same time, also Europe is now in the ability of actually using also tools like the anti-coercion instrument and others to also push back against certain economic pressure that might come without cutting ties entirely. And India, as mentioned before, is certainly a diversification partner, so very much aiming for deeper cooperation there. We've also been observing in the Indian approach to a security-driven investigation when it comes to Chinese technology. And again, Europe is very much in a position where it's trying to follow a balanced strategy, where it prioritizes alliances with like-minded democracies that include India, Japan, Canada, Brazil, for example, while also managing its relationship with China very pragmatically.
Right. And now, last but not least, as European defense spending rises, technologies such as AI, cyber capabilities, and space systems are becoming increasingly strategic. India is also expanding its defense industrial base and investing in dual-use innovation. Could Europe and India move beyond commercial tech cooperation into sensitive areas like defense technology and secure communications, or would political and export control constraints limit that ambition?
So we just had the Munich Security Conference last week, and I think this was certainly one of the discussion points in the rooms. I think what we will see throughout this year is a further investigation of the potential for cooperation around dual-use technologies. Some are very interesting around, for example, post-quantum cryptography, secure 6G networks, so those could maybe be a starting point. But as you rightly stated, political and export control constraints will play a role in also the potential of these discussions then, coming further to fruition. But I think, as mentioned before, this is all about taking a step-by-step approach, starting with less sensitive areas around the space topic, cybersecurity, and then investigating, as the trust grows, if maybe in the future there might be other opportunities for strategic partnerships.
Yes, we will be eyeing that. Thank you very much, Mr. Martin Hulin, for joining us on this episode of Trending Tech.
It was a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. With that, it's a wrap on this episode of the Trending Tech. For more tech updates and innovations, stay tuned on NewsX World. Hello and welcome to Deep Dive on NewsX World. I'm Asuma Katauka. Today we are diving into the controversy between Disney and ByteDance over AI-generated content. This legal clash raises key questions about intellectual property, AI, and the future of content creation. Let's break it down. It all started when Disney fired the first legal shot. Disney has sent a cease and desist order to ByteDance, accusing them of using AI technology to generate videos that mimic Disney's content without permission. Disney's issue is ByteDance's AI-powered video tool Seedance 2.0, which is being accused of violating intellectual property rights and exploiting copyrighted content. Disney's legal counsel has described this as willful, pervasive, and totally unacceptable. The platform is reportedly treating Disney's IP from Star Wars to Marvel as if it were free public domain clip art. ByteDance isn't backing down. They've pledged to add safeguards to Seedance 2.0 to prevent unauthorized IP usage. This could include stricter controls over what content the AI can generate and limiting the ability to recreate copyrighted works. Seedance 2.0 allows users to create content that closely mimics existing material. While a creative tool, it raises legal red flags. ByteDance's attempt to comply with copyright laws will be tested by the fast-evolving nature of AI technology. The question, will these safeguards be enough to prevent further copyright infringements? Let's consider the bigger picture. Disney's legal action is part of a growing trend where content creators are closely monitoring AI that can replicate their intellectual property. The future of AI in the entertainment industry is on the line, with AI tools like Seedance 2.0 offering new possibilities for storytelling but also posing challenges regarding intellectual property protection. This case raises fundamental questions about the balance between AI innovation and copyright protection. In the short term, companies like Disney will be vigilant about defending their intellectual property, leading to more legal challenges and potentially stricter regulations for AI technologies. On the flip side, AI companies like ByteDance must balance innovation with legal compliance. ByteDance's pledge is a step forward, but as AI evolves, these safeguards will need constant upgrades and updates to stay ahead of new content generation methods. In the long run, this case could set a precedent for how AI-generated content is treated under copyright law. Will it create clear guidelines for AI usage, or will it lead to a more complex legal landscape? But for now, all eyes are on ByteDance and Disney. Will ByteDance's safeguards prevent future IP infringements? Will Disney win the legal resolution it's seeking? And most importantly, what does this mean for the future of AI-generated content? Now for this, we welcome Professor Jim Rice. He's joining us live from Philippines. Thank you very much, Professor, for joining us again. Good to see you.
Nice to see you, Asuma.
Thank you. Now, looking at this, while ByteDance has pledged to strengthen safeguards to prevent the unauthorized generation of copyrighted characters, does Disney's cease and desist specifically target the latent space of the modeling, arguing that the very existence of pirated library within the training data constitutes a virtual smash and grab, or is the legal strategy primarily focused on the infringing outputs created by the users?
Well, I think it's the latter. Those are very good questions. And as you mentioned in your lead-in, this is a very rapidly evolving story. And the technology is overtaking, I think, the law in this case. If I recall, during the Biden administration, there was legislation that was passed in order to rein in ByteDance. And then when Trump came into power last year, he disregarded this legislation, this law, in favor of trying to do a deal with ByteDance. And obviously this has failed. And this is another example where Trump's dalliance and his fooling around with big tech is threatening not only national security, but also large industries like Disney and Marvel and other organizations that jealously guard their intellectual property.
Thank you for sharing that. And Professor, now given that the Japanese government has launched its own investigation into Sea-Dance for anime-related violations, alongside Disney's US-based claims, to what extent does this case signal a move towards a multilateral regulatory framework for Gen AI?
Well, I really hope that the Japanese government takes their own initiative, independent of the Trump administration. And, I also look to the European Union in their own efforts in terms of, for example, it's not exactly on this area, but, Australia and other countries have tried to limit the exposure to social media to only those over 16 years old, because they've seen how toxic this can be. And although this isn't exactly on your topic, I think that this is a very important area in which nations such as Japan and the European Union need to stand up to big tech for their own national security as well as their own intellectual property rights.
Yes, Professor, thank you very much for giving that example. Now, how will ByteDance's response to Disney's cease and desist impact the standard for duty of care regarding AI platforms that facilitate the synthesis of protected likenesses and trademarked franchises?
Exactly. Well, again, we've already seen, for example, again, slightly off your topic, but just last month, I believe, Elon Musk's Grok, the manifestation of Elon Musk's AI, has been criticized and attacked for its illicit use of reproducing or reality of individuals, sometimes young women and sometimes in undressed positions, and this has been problematic, and Grok has been facing legal challenges from mostly the EU. So in terms of your exact question, all I can say is that the intellectual property has been constantly, for many, many years, robbed and ripped off by the People's Republic of China. And quite frankly, if they follow in their pattern, they're not going to change now.
Right. And last but not least, Professor, now considering the rapid growth of AI in content creation, how do you envision the future of collaboration between traditional content creators like Disney and emerging AI-driven platforms like ByteDance?
That's a good question. I wish I knew the answer to that. On a personal note, my wife runs a small animation company. And she produces, her company and her illustrators produce animations. And I really would hope that there would be a kind of collaboration between AI and smaller animators in places like the Philippines. But quite frankly, I doubt it, because it seems to me that the role of big tech and AI in the hands of people like ByteDance and Elon Musk is basically predatory and dangerous. So I'm very skeptical of this.
With that, I would like to thank Professor Jim Rice for joining us today from Vegan and sharing that insight. Thank you. And that wraps up this edition of Deep Dive. Stay tuned to NewsX World for more news and updates.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with the US a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws, and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination, and if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
In the midst of this, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with US a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different
Hello and welcome, I'm Ellie Richardson and you're watching The World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top headlines of this hour. Russian officials have arrived in Geneva for talks with US and Ukrainian teams aimed at ending the years-long conflict in Ukraine. US President Donald Trump hopes Ukraine reaches a deal with Russia fast. US President Donald Trump said that he would be involved indirectly in high-stake talks between Iran and the US over Tehran's nuclear program in Geneva, adding he believed Tehran wanted to make a deal. Bangladesh's Prime Minister-to-be, Tariq Rahman, and lawmakers are sworn into Parliament, becoming the first elected representatives since a deadly 2024 uprising. President Donald Trump has said Cuba was a failed nation and called on Havana to make a deal. Washington is in talks with Cuba's highest people, just days after he threatened the island's struggling economy with what he described as a virtual oil blockade. New Mexico lawmakers passed legislation to launch what they said was the first full investigation into what happened at Zorro Ranch, where the late US sex offender Jeffrey Epstein is accused of trafficking and sexually assaulting girls and women. A bipartisan committee will seek testimony from survivors of alleged sexual abuse at the ranch, located about 30 miles south of Santa Fe. Heavy rains and strong winds have lashed New Zealand in recent days, killing one man, flooding large areas and cutting power links to tens of thousands across New Zealand's North Island. French President Emmanuel Macron begins a three-day visit to India on Tuesday, with talks focused on artificial intelligence cooperation and a potential multi-billion-dollar Dassault Rafale fighter jet deal. 3 people, including the suspect, were fatally shot during a Rhode Island youth hockey game. Pawtucket Police Chief Tina Goncalves told reporters that 3 other victims were hospitalized in critical condition. The shooter died from an apparent self-inflicted gun wound. And for your top story this hour, the foreign ministers of Saudi Arabia, Jordan, UAE, Qatar, Indonesia, Pakistan, Egypt and Turkey have strongly condemned Israel's decision to designate land in the occupied West Bank as state land and approve producers for settlement registrations. They called the move a grave escalation, aiming to intensify settlement activity and undermine Palestinian rights. The ministers reaffirmed that the step violates international law, including the 4th Geneva Convention and UN Security Council Resolution 2334. They stressed that the decision contradicts the International Court of Justice's advisory opinion and undermines the prospects of a two-state solution, calling for a decisive international action to halt these violations. Russia launched 29 missiles and 396 drones at Ukraine ahead of the US-mediated peace talks in Geneva, according to Kyiv. The two-day talks, set to begin today afternoon, will likely focus on land disputes, with Russia demanding that Ukraine cede 20% of the Donetsk region, which Kyiv has rejected. The talks, now being held in Switzerland, follow two previous rounds in Abu Dhabi that saw little breakthrough. Meanwhile, Kremlin says three-way talks on Ukraine in Geneva, and it will continue tomorrow. No information expected today. US President Donald Trump is pressing both sides to reach a deal, but the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has expressed concerns over the pressure to make concessions. We are now being joined by Georgi Toloroya, who's a professor at Russia Academy of Science. Thank you so much for joining us today on NewsX World. What does the scale of timing and the timing of Russia's attack, 29 missiles and 396 drones on critical infrastructure, indicate about Moscow's military strategy as diplomatic negotiations are underway in Geneva?
Well, I wouldn't say there's something dramatic. There's a normal war going on. 29 missiles is just peanuts. And Ukrainians also have launched about, I think, more than 150 drones over Russia this past night. So it's unfortunately it's the war business as usual, and unless the negotiations are over, you shouldn't over-dramatize it. This is what Zelensky is doing. He's using his propaganda to try to present his opponents as doing something wrong in order to strengthen his position. That's a very cheap trick.
And how might such significant escalation in hostilities affect the credibility and future prospects of peace talks in Geneva, particularly given previous rounds mediated by international actors?
I don't agree with you qualifying this as an escalation. It's a normal war going on, and it will go on unless the peace is reached. And so don't try to say that there is some escalation on the Russian part. The same can be said about Ukrainian. They would have escalated if they had more firepower, but they are doing what they can with the resources they have. Russia is doing what it can with the resources it has, and will continue so unless the peace is reached.
And how should Ukraine balance immediate defense needs when with its long-term diplomatic goals?
Well, I don't really care about Ukraine. Ukraine could go to Geneva talks with serious intention to find peace, to find a solution that will suit everyone. If they haven't got this spirit, if they haven't got this will, then no solution can be found. And it wouldn't be surprising because Zelensky wants to continue the war, to keep on in his position, to keep his president's post, and to get more aid and more support from Western powers.
Thank you, Professor Georgi. Stay with us as we will be back with you shortly. Nikolai Patrushev, a close ally of Russian President Vladimir Putin, says that Russia could deploy its navy to prevent European powers from seizing its vessels and may retaliate against European shipping if Russian ships are seized. This comes as Western states have sought to cut off Russia from global trade and cripple its finances by imposing more than 30,000 sanctions over its war in Ukraine. They have also tried to block oil tankers suspected of involvement in Russian oil shipments, and in January the United States seized a Russian-flagged oil tanker as part of its efforts to curb Venezuelan oil ports. We are now being joined by Professor Georgi again. Thank you for joining us back here on NewsX World. What are the geopolitical implications of Russia threatening to deploy its navy to stop European countries from seizing Russian-linked vessels?
Well, first of all, when you say sanctions, it's a tricky word. Sanctions means that only when a country or certain international act is punished for something, for doing something wrong, and that's what the UN does. Any country, individual country, declaring sanctions, this is not sanctions. That's the hostile act towards another country. This is not punishment, because no one has the right to judge of the individual countries. Only UN has. So when you say that the US and European are pursuing their sanctions and Russia is breaking it, it's just bilateral movement from both sides. Both sides take hostile acts against one another. But seizing a ship at high seas is an act of war. It's casus belli, classical casus belli. This is something that can be answered in full strength by full military force. And I think that Russia have promised strong rebuff, but it can include anything. It could include attacking the same vessels who attack Russian ships. It can include doing symmetrically attacking the Western cargo ships, and even, for example, planting mines on some sea routes which are used by Western powers. If one starts, and in this case, the West European countries held by US start a war, they get the war in exchange. That's how it goes.
And is the language of potential retaliation against European shipping a credible threat or strategic posturing by the Kremlin? And how should NATO respond to avoid escalation?
Well, stop this high seas piracy. It's a piracy. It's an act of war. It's a ship, which is a peaceful ship, and it's carrying not military but civilian targets in a simple act of trade. They say that this trade benefits Russia. Well, trade benefits countries. If Russia is denied trade, then other countries will also be denied the right to trade. The ships should be attacked and sunk.
And how might these tensions over seizing vessels shape future Western policy on sanctions, maritime security and diplomatic channels with Moscow?
I think this is it not only concerns Moscow. It's a very strategic, dangerous precedent. If a country's ships are seized because some country doesn't like this country trading and getting profit, then it can be repeated with any other country. Next day, when you have a conflict, when India has a conflict with Pakistan, for example, China could seize Indian ships saying, well, we want to deny you the right to trade because you attack Pakistan, or something like that. This is a very dangerous situation, dangerous precedent. It should be immediately stopped before it gets too late.
Thank you, Professor Georgi, for joining us here on NewsX World. A series of attacks in northwest Pakistan have left at least 14 people dead, including 3 civilians and 11 security personnel. The incidents, which involved 2 bombings and a gunfight between attackers and police, took place in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, a province, resulting in at least 25 others being wounded. The attacks come amid rising insurgent activity in southern and northern provinces bordering Afghanistan. This follows a recent suicide bombing in Islamabad claimed by the Islamic State, which killed 31 people and wounded 169 others. We are now being joined by retired Major General Gigi Davidi, who is a war veteran and Professor of International Relations and Strategic Studies, joining us from New Delhi. Thank you for joining us here today on NewsX World. Thank you. What does this latest militant attack in northwestern Pakistan signal about the evolving security situation in regions like Khyber?
Well, Ali, if you look at the larger picture, Pakistan has been witnessing a series of violent incidences, especially over the recent times. And there is a rationale and a reason for this. First and foremost, Pakistan is misgoverning, especially as the minority areas that include Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, include Balochistan, and also the Pakistan occupied Kashmir. And these minorities have been victimized, they have been marginalized, and so therefore they have taken to arms to get the justice. Now, these recent instances now in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa is primarily orchestrated by the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, because firstly, Pakhtuns do not accept themselves as part of Pakistan. Secondly, there is a border of about 2,640 kilometers, and they have not accepted the Duran line. So therefore, these instances are taking place off and on, and Pakistan alleges that the TTP, that is Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, is getting support across the Afghanistan border. Then also, recently there have been very serious violent incidents in Balochistan. The Balochistan Liberation Army last month, they took a heavy toll of the security forces. So, and also, you know, in Islamabad, there was an attack on the Shia mosque by the ISIS. And all this, what does it show? It shows, as I said initially, that Pakistan is misgoverning. These minorities have serious issues. They have serious grievances, which Pakistan has not been able to address. And another very important factor is Pakistan is a state which uses proxies, which uses terrorists as part of the national policy. And therefore, they have been breeding all type of groups. And today, these groups, many of them are turned against their masters. And you see a very high rate of violence and such instances taking place. Ali.
And how are Pakistan's security forces adapting their counter-terrorism strategies in response to attacks that are increasingly affect both security personnel and civilians, including children?
Well, Ali, Pakistan government and especially its army is trying to solve or resolve the political problem through military means. And they have been using very heavy-handed approach and using, exorbitant force. In fact, in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, they have known to use the F-16 fighters, aircrafts, and they are using very heavy weapons against these, either you call them insurgent or the freedom fighters. The point is, Pakistan army, their policy has been steamrolling policy, use extensive force against these groups, and that has not worked out, because the point is that these groups are very, they operate in small teams, they are very agile, and they employ guerrilla tactics, and where the army is using very conventional means. And I feel that until there is a political dialogue, there is a political means to resolve the issue, this military approach is not going to work. And that's exactly the situation on the ground, that since especially last couple of months, the Pakistan security forces have paid a heavy price, because they have been trying to target these groups, but they have not succeeded. Rather, they have suffered very heavy casualties in return. Ali.
And what are the humanitarian and social impacts in reoccurring militant attacks on local communities, particularly in terms of displacement, fear and long-term deployment?
Well, Ali, there have been serious human rights violations by the Pakistan army, and a number of human rights organizations have pointed out these. Thousands of people have gone missing in Balochistan, and so also in the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. The point is that there have been serious violations of human rights as far as the locals are concerned, and therefore that's why their representative groups like Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan or Balochistan Liberation Army has taken on upon themselves to protect their minority groups. But unfortunately, I feel that the human rights organization also have double standards, and they have not come very heavily on Pakistan. Rather, Pakistan was on the grey list of the FATF, but they managed to wriggle out by using the influence of China and even America. I think that Pakistan should be on the blacklist as far as because they are supporting these terrorist organizations. But the point is that human rights organizations have limitations, and the people continue to suffer. Unfortunately, they have not been given the right kind of hearing or the right kind of support. So therefore, there are blatant, human rights violations by the Pakistani security forces, and at the end of it is the civilians who end up paying a very heavy price. But that's the irony of this situation in Pakistan. Ali.
Thank you so much, Major General Gigi Davidi, for joining us here today on NewsX World. It was a pleasure speaking with you. President Donald Trump, Trump's new ambassador to South Africa, conservative media critic Brent Boswell, has arrived in Pretoria to take up his post. This comes as tensions between the two nations remain high following Trump's return to office in January 2025. Relations have been strained since Trump expelled South Africa's ambassador, accusing him of being critical of the US. Boswell, founder of the Media Research Center, is a staunch defender of Israel, and his appointment comes amid disagreements, including South Africa's genocide case against Israel. Although Boswell has arrived, he still needs to present his credentials to South African President Cyril Ramaphosa before assuming his official title. India's second largest software exporter, Infosys, has revealed that AI services accounted for 5.5% of its revenue in the December quarter, marking the first time the company has broken out its AI business. CEO Salil Parekh has said AI is growing rapidly and is well integrated with client services, including autonomous agents and embedded systems. According to reports, Infosys is working over 4,600 AI projects and has built more than 500 AI agents. This disclosure comes amid growing investors' concerns about AI's potential to dispute the traditional outsourcing model. That's all we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.
In the midst of death, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
Hello and welcome, I'm Ellie Richardson and you're watching The World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top headlines of this hour. Russian officials have arrived in Geneva for talks with US and Ukrainian teams aimed at ending the years-long conflict in Ukraine. US President Donald Trump hopes Ukraine reaches a deal with Russia fast. US President Donald Trump hopes Ukraine reaches with a deal as fast ahead of Washington brokered talks in Geneva. Today, Trump is pushing to end the conflict, but two previous rounds of US-mediated talks in Abu Dhabi did not yield any signs of a breakthrough. Bangladesh's Prime Minister-to-be Tariq Rahman and lawmakers are sworn into Parliament, becoming the first elected representative since a deadly 2024 uprising. President Donald Trump has said Cuba was a failed nation and called on Havana to make a deal. Washington is in talks with Cuba's highest people just days after he threatened the island's struggling economy with what he described as a virtual oil blockage. New Mexico lawmakers passed legislation to launch what they said was the first full investigation into what happened at Zero Ranch, where the late US sex offender Jeffrey Epstein is accused of trafficking and sexual assault. Assaulting Girls and Women, a bipartisan committee, will seek testimony from survivors of alleged sexual abuse at the ranch, located about 30 miles south of Santa Fe. US President Donald Trump said that he will be involved indirectly in high-stake talks between Iran and the US over Tehran's nuclear program in Geneva, adding he believes Tehran wanted to make a deal. Heavy rains and strong winds have lashed New Zealand in recent days, killing one man, flooding large areas and cutting power links to tens of thousands across New Zealand's North Island. French President Emmanuel Macron begins a 3-day visit to India with talks focused on artificial intelligence cooperation and a potential multi-billion-dollar Dassault Rafale fighter jet deal. Australia's Prime Minister Anthony Albanese confirmed that the government will not help Australians linked to Islamic State militants returning from a Syrian camp. The government has stated that individuals returning from the camp will face prosecution charges in a case of law violations. According to reports, around 34 Australians, including women and children, were recently released from the camp but returned due to technical reasons. Reports suggest that the issue has sparked debate in the country, with One Nation party gaining support by opposing the return of IS-linked individuals, calling for stricter immigration policies. We are now being joined by Yussi Kapawasa, who's an Israeli intelligence and security expert, joining us from Tel Aviv. Thank you for joining us here today on NewsX World.
My pleasure.
What are the legal and moral implications of Australia's decision to refuse government-assisted reparation of women and children linked to the IS, especially considering international law obliges countries to accept their own citizens?
Well, there is the problem of revoking the citizenship of those people that were arrested when ISIS failed and was taken over by the Kurdish forces in Syria. And some countries have revoked their citizenship, some did not. Those who did not really face now a problem, but definitely for Australia to accept these people back in Australia is a dangerous move, because we already know what happened in Bondi Beach on the 14th of December. So clearly this poses a clear security risk to absorb them back in Australia. The British have refused to do that, and I think many others refuse, and most of them were moved now that they were released in Syria after the attack of the Syrian forces on the Kurdish forces about several weeks ago. Most of them were moved to Iraq and were held there. But if there are going to be, some of them have managed to escape this fate and probably reach all kinds of countries that are supposed to absorb them back.
And how does this policy, including prosecution under anti-terror law and the possibility...
what we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reforms, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with US a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination, and if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war.
Hello and welcome, I'm Ellie Richardson and you're watching The World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top headlines of this hour. Russian officials have arrived in Geneva for talks with US and Ukrainian teams aimed at ending the years-long conflict in Ukraine. US President Donald Trump hopes Ukraine reaches a deal with Russia fast. US President Donald Trump hopes Ukraine reaches with a deal as fast ahead of Washington-brokered talks in Geneva. Today, Trump is pushing to end the conflict, but two previous rounds of US-mediated talks in Abu Dhabi did not yield any signs of a breakthrough. Bangladesh's Prime Minister-to-be Tariq Rahman and lawmakers are sworn into Parliament, becoming the first elected representative since a deadly 2024 uprising. President Donald Trump has said Cuba was a failed nation and called on Havana to make a deal. Washington is in talks with Cuba's highest people, just days after he threatened the island's struggling economy with what he described as a virtual oil blockage. New Mexico lawmakers passed legislation to launch what they said was the first full investigation into what's happened at Zuro Ranch, where the late US sex offender Jeffrey Epstein is accused of trafficking and sexual assault. Assaulting Girls and Women, a bipartisan committee, will seek testimony from survivors of alleged sexual abuse at the ranch, located about 30 miles south of Santa Fe. US President Donald Trump said that he will be involved indirectly in high-stake talks between Iran and the US over Tehran's nuclear program in Geneva, adding he believes Tehran wanted to make a deal. Heavy rains and strong winds have lashed New Zealand in recent days, killing one man, flooding large areas and cutting power links to tens of thousands across New Zealand's North Island. French President Emmanuel Macron begins a three-day visit to India with talks focused on artificial intelligence cooperation and a potential multi-billion-dollar Dassault Rafale fighter jet deal. Australia's Prime Minister Anthony Albanese confirmed that the government will not help Australians linked to Islamic State militants returning from a Syrian camp. The government has stated that individuals returning from the camp will face prosecution charges in a case of law violations. According to reports, around 34 Australians, including women and children, were recently released from the camp but returned due to technical reasons. Reports suggest that the issue has sparked debate in the country, with One Nation party gaining support by opposing the return of IS-linked individuals, calling for stricter immigration policies. We are now being joined by Yussi Kapawasa, who's an Israeli intelligence and security expert, joining us from Tel Aviv. Thank you for joining us here today on NewsX World.
My pleasure.
What are the legal and moral implications of Australia's decision to refuse government-assisted reparation of women and children linked to the IS, especially considering international law obliges countries to accept their own citizens?
Well, there is the problem of revoking the citizenship of those people that were arrested when ISIS failed and was taken over by the Kurdish forces in Syria. And some countries have revoked their citizenship, some did not. Those who did not really face now a problem, but definitely for Australia to accept these people back in Australia is a dangerous move, because we already know what happened in Bondi Beach on the 14th of December. So clearly this poses a clear security risk to absorb them back in Australia. The British have refused to do that, and I think many others refused, and most of them were moved now that they were released in Syria after the attack of the Syrian forces on the Kurdish forces about several weeks ago. Most of them were moved to Iraq and were held there. But if there are going to be, some of them have managed to escape this fate and probably reach all kinds of countries that are supposed to absorb them back.